Why do some people move through life with quiet confidence while others remain confused, manipulated, and exhausted by the same situations repeating themselves? Why do certain individuals seem to understand human behavior before it even unfolds, while others keep getting surprised by the same patterns again and again? Why does cleverness appear effortless in some people, almost natural, while others struggle their entire lives to read a single situation correctly? And why does life consistently reward those who observe quietly more than those who speak loudly? Here is the truth most people refuse to accept. Cleverness is not intelligence. Cleverness is not education. Cleverness is not charm. Cleverness is something far more dangerous and far more rare. It is the ability to see what others miss, understand what others ignore, and remain composed where others react. Most people believe cleverness is something you are born with. They assume some individuals simply arrived in this world with sharper instincts, stronger awareness, and a deeper understanding of human nature. But that belief is incomplete. Cleverness is built, not inherited. It is shaped by experience, refined by disappointment, and sharpened by the willingness to observe instead of react. The clever person was not always clever. They became that way after being deceived enough times, betrayed enough times, and underestimated enough times to finally understand that the world rewards perception more than performance. Machiavelli understood something that emotionally driven people often miss. The world does not respond to who you are. It responds to how you are perceived. And perception is shaped by control, by silence, by timing, and by the rare ability to remain unreadable while others reveal themselves completely. This is why clever people often appear quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand that every word spoken too early gives away information that could later be used against them. They speak when speaking serves a purpose. They listen when listening reveals more. And they observe constantly, not out of suspicion, but out of strategy. When people are young, they believe being clever means being the loudest, the fastest, or the most impressive in a room. They confuse cleverness with confidence, intelligence with intensity, and strategy with manipulation. But real cleverness is none of those things. Real cleverness is restraint. It is the discipline to not react when others expect you to. It is the patience to gather information before forming opinions. It is the wisdom to understand that most people reveal themselves naturally if you give them enough time and silence to do so. Before we go any deeper, write this in the comments. I will observe before I react. Number 1. Cleverness begins with silence. The first lesson of becoming clever is learning the power of saying less. Most people talk too much because silence makes them uncomfortable. They fill empty space with unnecessary words, share their plans before executing them, and reveal their emotions before understanding their own situation. And every word spoken in this way becomes a small piece of information that someone else can use, judge, or exploit. The clever person understands this immediately. They speak with purpose, not pressure. They share when sharing strengthens their position, not when sharing satisfies their need to be heard. This is harder than it sounds because human beings are naturally driven to express themselves. We want to be understood. We want to defend our reputation. We want to correct misunderstandings the moment they appear. But cleverness requires resisting that impulse. It requires accepting that not every accusation deserves a response. Not every question deserves a complete answer, and not every situation requires your participation. Some battles are won by walking past them. Some conversations are won by not entering them at all. And some opinions about you are best left uncorrected because the people forming them were never going to change their minds anyway. Machiavelli observed that the appearance of mystery is often more powerful than the appearance of openness. When people cannot fully read you, they begin to imagine more depth in you than may actually exist. They become curious. They become careful. They begin treating you with a kind of cautious respect they never extend to those who reveal everything immediately. This is not manipulation. This is positioning. The person who shares everything is easy to predict. The person who shares selectively is impossible to control. Number 2. Clever people study patterns instead of moments. Most people make decisions based on single events. Someone smiles at them, and they assume the person is kind. Someone praises them, and they assume the person is loyal. Someone apologizes, and they assume the conflict is over. But single moments are deceiving. They show what a person wants you to see in that specific situation, under that specific pressure, for that specific reason. They do not show who that person actually is over time. And cleverness lives entirely in the difference between those two things. The clever person does not judge anyone based on a single interaction. They watch behavior across weeks, months, sometimes years. They notice whether the kindness continues when they no longer need it. They notice whether the praise survives when they begin succeeding too much. They notice whether the apology results in changed behavior or simply functions as a temporary tool to restore access. Because words are easy, patterns are honest. And the gap between what people say once and what they do repeatedly is where almost all of life's most important information hides. This is why clever people are rarely surprised by betrayal. Not because they expected it, but because they noticed the smaller signs that preceded it. The slight shift in tone, the pause before answering a direct question, the convenient timing of certain disappearances, the way someone celebrated your failures slightly more enthusiastically than your wins. These signals were always there. The clever person simply trained themselves to see them. And by the time others were shocked by the outcome, the clever person had already adjusted their expectations months earlier. Number 3, clever people understand that emotion blinds judgment. One of the most dangerous things in life is making decisions while emotionally activated. Anger, excitement, fear, attraction, hope, all of these states distort perception. They make small things look enormous, dangerous things look harmless, and harmful people look attractive. And in those moments, the brain stops gathering information and starts seeking confirmation for whatever the emotion is already telling it. This is how good people make terrible decisions, not because they lack intelligence, but because their emotions temporarily overrode their judgment. Clever people learn to recognize this state in themselves. They notice when their heart is racing faster than their thoughts. They notice when they want to respond immediately, when they want to commit suddenly, when they want to cut ties impulsively. And in those moments, they pause. Not because they are suppressing their feelings, but because they understand that decisions made in emotional storms rarely survive emotional calm. The clever person waits until the emotion settles, and then they evaluate the situation with the part of their mind that is not currently bleeding. This discipline alone separates the clever from the merely intelligent. Because intelligence can analyze, but only cleverness knows when to delay analysis until the conditions for clear thinking have returned. And that timing, that quiet refusal to be rushed by your own emotions, is one of the most valuable skills a person can ever develop. Number 4, clever people understand the weight of timing. Most situations in life are not won by what you say or do, but by when you say or do it. The same words spoken at the wrong moment become useless, even harmful. The same actions taken too early appear desperate, and the same actions taken too late appear weak. Timing is the invisible variable that separates the clever from the merely capable. And yet most people never think about it. They speak when they feel like speaking, act when emotion pushes them, and react the moment something triggers them. The clever person operates on a completely different rhythm. They understand that information shared at the right moment can change someone's perception of you permanently. The same information shared too early or too late may have no effect at all, or worse, the opposite effect of what was intended. They understand that confronting someone in the middle of their pride creates a different reaction than confronting them after their pride has been quietly bruised by life. They understand that asking for something when the other person is calm produces results that asking for the same thing under pressure never will. Timing is not just patience. It is precision. It is the discipline to wait until the moment is shaped correctly before stepping into it. Machiavelli understood that opportunity is not always created. Sometimes it is recognized. The clever person watches the environment carefully, studies the mood of the people around them, and waits for the conditions that make their action most likely to succeed. They do not force outcomes. They prepare for outcomes. And when the moment arrives, they move without hesitation because they have already studied the situation long before others even noticed it forming. This is why clever people often appear lucky. But it is not luck. It is awareness combined with patience, and that combination is rarer than people think. Number 5, clever people learn to read what is not said. Most communication does not happen through words. It happens through silence, through hesitation, through what people avoid, what they minimize, what they laugh about too quickly, and what they refuse to acknowledge at all. The clever person understands that listening to words alone is a beginner's mistake. The deeper truth is almost always located in the spaces between sentences, in the pauses before answers, in the topics that suddenly shift when certain subjects come too close. And once you learn to listen this way, people stop being mysterious. They become readable. Watch what someone avoids, and you will learn what they fear. Watch what they exaggerate, and you will learn what they are insecure about. Watch what they criticize loudly in others, and you will often discover what they secretly struggle with themselves. Watch how quickly they change the subject when certain names appear, and you will learn what wounds they carry but refuse to admit. Words are the surface. Reactions are the truth. And the clever person trains themselves to study reactions far more carefully than statements, because reactions are involuntary, while statements are rehearsed. Machiavelli observed that human beings reveal more about themselves through what they hide than through what they share. A person who never discusses their past is communicating something. A person who deflects every personal question with humor is communicating something. A person who suddenly becomes serious whenever a certain topic appears is communicating something. The clever person notices these signals without confronting them. They store the information quietly, allowing the picture to complete itself over time. They do not force confessions. They wait for behavior to reveal what conversation never will. Number 6. Clever people do not argue with fools. One of the most important disciplines in life is recognizing when an argument is not worth entering. Most disagreements people get pulled into are not actually about logic or truth. They are about ego, about emotional release, about the need someone has to feel right in front of an audience. And entering such an argument, no matter how clearly you can win it intellectually, costs you more than it gives you. Because once you step into someone else's emotional chaos, you become part of that chaos. Your composure suffers, your reputation suffers, and your energy gets drained by a situation that was never designed to produce understanding in the first place. The clever person learns to recognize these traps quickly. They notice when a conversation is being framed to make them defensive. They notice when someone is asking a question only to attack the answer. They notice when the goal is not to find truth, but to provoke a reaction. And in those moments, they refuse to engage. Not because they are afraid of conflict, but because they understand that some conflicts are designed to waste you, and recognizing that early is itself a form of victory. Walking away is not weakness. Sometimes it is the strongest move available because it denies the other person the satisfaction of pulling you down to their level. Write this in the comments. I protect my mind from unnecessary battles. There is also a deeper reason clever people avoid these arguments. Every time you explain yourself to someone who has already decided to misunderstand you, you give them more material. They take your words, twist them, repeat them, and use them later in ways you never intended. The clever person knows that silence in the face of bad faith is not surrender. It is protection. It is the refusal to feed something that grows stronger only when you participate in it. And over time, this discipline alone changes how others perceive you. You begin to carry a kind of quiet authority that loud people can never replicate, because authority that does not need to defend itself is always stronger than authority that does. Number 7. Clever people separate identity from emotion. Most people make a critical mistake when they experience strong emotions. They identify with them. They say, I am angry, I am hurt, I am rejected, as if the feeling has become who they are. And the moment that identification happens, the emotion takes control of their behavior. They act from the inside of the feeling rather than observing it from a slight distance. The clever person learns to do the opposite. They notice the emotion without becoming it. They feel anger without becoming angry. They feel rejection without becoming rejected. They feel disappointment without becoming defined by it. This separation is one of the hardest skills a person can develop because it requires interrupting an automatic mental process that has been running since childhood. But once learned, it changes everything. Because the moment you can observe your emotions instead of being swept by them, you regain access to your judgment. You can think while feeling. You can plan while wounded. You can act with composure even when something inside you wants to explode. And that ability, the ability to remain functional during emotional storms, is what allows clever people to make decisions in conditions where most people would only react. Machiavelli understood that those who cannot control their inner state will always be controlled by those who can. Because emotional volatility is predictable, the person who explodes easily can be provoked into mistakes. The person who breaks down easily can be manipulated through pressure. The person who falls in love too quickly can be controlled through attention. But the person who has trained themselves to remain centered while everything around them shifts becomes nearly impossible to manipulate. They do not give others the reactions those others were hoping to extract. And when manipulation produces no response, the manipulator eventually withdraws because they realize their tools no longer work on you. This discipline is not coldness. It is mastery. The clever person still feels deeply. They still experience joy, anger, sadness, and longing like everyone else. But they refuse to let those feelings dictate their actions. They allow emotions to inform them without allowing emotions to govern them. And that quiet authority over their own inner world is the foundation on which everything else clever in their life is built. Number 8. Clever people understand that information is power. Most people share too much, too quickly, with too many people. They reveal their plans before executing them. They share their goals with individuals who have not earned the right to know. They expose their weaknesses to people they barely understand. And they wonder later why their progress was sabotaged, why their ideas were stolen, why their vulnerabilities were used against them. The clever person operates by a different principle. They understand that every piece of information shared is a piece of power transferred. And once power is transferred, it cannot easily be retrieved. This does not mean clever people are paranoid or distant. It means they are selective. They understand that some information belongs only to themselves, some belongs to a small circle of trusted individuals, and some belongs only to the world after it has already been achieved. They share their wins after the wins are secured, not while they are still fragile. They share their plans only with those whose interests are aligned with their success. They share their wounds only with those who have proven they will not turn those wounds into weapons later. This is not secrecy. This is intelligence. Because the same information that empowers you in one set of hands can destroy you in another. Machiavelli understood that knowledge in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. The person who knows your fears can pressure you with them. The person who knows your insecurities can manipulate you through them. The person who knows your ambitions can sabotage them quietly. And often, the people most willing to extract this information from you are the ones who appear most interested in your life. They ask careful questions. They listen attentively. They create the impression of safety. And the more comfortable you become, the more you reveal. The clever person recognizes this dynamic immediately. They do not interpret curiosity as care. They observe what someone does with information before deciding how much more to share. Number 9. Clever people respect the long game. Most people make decisions based on what feels good right now, what produces quick results, what relieves immediate discomfort. They optimize for the next hour, the next day, the next week. And in doing so, they consistently sacrifice the next year, the next decade, the next life chapter. The clever person operates on a completely different time horizon. They are willing to endure short-term discomfort for long-term advantage. They are willing to accept being misunderstood today to be respected tomorrow. They are willing to lose small battles to win significant wars. And this willingness to delay gratification separates them from almost everyone else around them. This is one of the most difficult disciplines a human being can develop because the brain is wired to prioritize the immediate over the eventual. Every instinct in your body pushes you toward what feels good now. Every emotional system rewards quick satisfaction. And yet, almost everything valuable in life, real skill, real wealth, real relationships, real wisdom, requires sustained effort across long periods during which there is very little visible reward. The clever person understands this and continues investing anyway. They plant seeds whose results they may not see for years. They build foundations whose value will become obvious only later. They stay disciplined when no one is watching because they know that the compound effect of small, consistent actions eventually produces results that no single dramatic action ever could. There is something deeper here too. The long game changes how you handle people. When you are thinking only about today, you react to every slight. Defend every accusation, respond to every provocation. When you are thinking about 10 years from now, you stop wasting energy on situations that will not matter then. You stop arguing with people who will not be in your life by then. You stop chasing approval from individuals whose opinions will be irrelevant by then. This perspective alone removes most of the unnecessary suffering people inflict on themselves. Because most of what people obsess over today is genuinely meaningless within the larger arc of their lives. And the clever person, who keeps that arc in mind, is freed from the small daily wars that exhaust everyone else. Write this in the comments. I am building what time will reveal. Number 10. Clever people understand the danger of being too predictable. One of the easiest ways to give others power over you is to become entirely predictable. When people know exactly how you will respond, exactly what you will tolerate, exactly what you will do under specific conditions, they begin treating you accordingly. They stop respecting you because there is nothing about you that requires consideration anymore. They have already calculated you. And once a person has been fully calculated by those around them, they lose the ability to surprise, to negotiate from strength, or to command attention when it matters. This does not mean clever people are inconsistent or unreliable. They are deeply consistent in their principles, but they remain unpredictable in their responses. They do not always react where reaction is expected. They do not always engage where engagement is anticipated. They do not always reward the behaviors others assume will work on them. And this carefully maintained unpredictability becomes a kind of protection. Because the moment people cannot fully predict you, they begin treating you with more care. They begin thinking before testing you. They begin respecting boundaries they would have crossed without hesitation if they believed you would not push back. Machiavelli understood that being too readable is a form of vulnerability. The person whose moods can be predicted, whose buttons can be pressed, whose loyalties can be assumed, becomes a tool in the hands of those who study them. The clever person allows certain things to remain unknown. They allow others to wonder. They allow situations to develop without immediately declaring their position. And this calculated ambiguity is not deception. It is preservation. It keeps their authority intact in environments where transparency would only be exploited. Number 11. Clever people do not perform their cleverness. One of the most important paradoxes of becoming clever is that truly clever people rarely display it openly. They do not announce their insights. They do not lecture others about how perceptive they are. They do not constantly demonstrate their ability to see through situations, because they understand something most people miss. The moment you reveal your cleverness, you lose its primary advantage. People begin guarding themselves around you. They start filtering what they say. They become careful about what they reveal. And the clever person, whose entire effectiveness depends on others underestimating them, suddenly loses the access to information that made their insight possible in the first place. This is why many of the most strategically intelligent people in any room appear ordinary on the surface. They do not draw attention to themselves. They allow others to talk freely without realizing they are being studied. They allow situations to unfold while quietly observing every detail. And the people who eventually discover how much these individuals understood will often feel disturbed by how much they revealed without knowing they were revealing it. This is not manipulation in the malicious sense. It is positioning. It is the recognition that being underestimated is one of the most powerful advantages a person can ever possess. Machiavelli understood that visible power invites resistance, but invisible influence operates without obstacle. The person who is recognized as dangerous is treated with caution. The person who is dismissed as harmless is allowed access that the recognized threat would never receive. And the clever person, understanding this, often chooses to remain in the second category for as long as possible. They reveal their depth only when revealing it serves a clear purpose. Otherwise, they remain quiet, attentive, and easily overlooked, gathering information continuously while others assume they are simply present without significance. This discipline requires letting go of the need to be seen as clever. It requires accepting that others may underestimate you, may dismiss you, may speak down to you, without feeling the urge to correct them. Because every time you correct them, you lose a small piece of the advantage their underestimation provided. The clever person does not need others to know they are clever. They only need to know it themselves. And from that quiet inner certainty, they move through the world with a kind of patient authority that the loud and the obvious can never match. Number 12. Clever people learn to detach from outcomes they cannot control. One of the deepest forms of suffering in human life comes from trying to control what was never available for control in the first place. People exhaust themselves trying to force outcomes that depend on other people's decisions, other people's emotions, other people's timing, and other people's willingness to behave a certain way. They invest enormous energy into situations whose results are determined by variables far outside their reach. And when those situations do not unfold the way they hoped, they collapse, blame themselves, and assume the failure proves something deep and personal about who they are. The clever person operates differently. They learn early that effort and outcome are not the same thing, and that one of the highest forms of intelligence is recognizing which battles you can actually influence and which you are simply burning yourself out trying to control. This does not mean the clever person stops trying. It means they stop attaching their entire emotional state to results that were never fully theirs to determine. They do their part with full commitment, and then they release the rest. They put in the effort, prepare carefully, position themselves intelligently, and then accept that what happens next will be shaped by forces beyond their control. This detachment is not coldness. It is sanity, because the alternative is to live in a permanent state of anxiety, constantly trying to manipulate outcomes that respond more to luck, timing, and other people's choices than to your willpower alone. The clever person refuses to live like that. They invest their energy where it actually produces returns, and they protect their peace from the parts of life that were never going to listen to them no matter how hard they pushed. Machiavelli understood that obsessing over the uncontrollable is a slow form of self-destruction. People who cannot accept the limits of their influence end up exhausting themselves in battles they were never meant to fight. They argue with reality. They negotiate with circumstances that have already decided not to bend. They blame themselves for outcomes shaped by forces they never had the power to alter. And in doing all this, they slowly lose the strength that could have been used productively elsewhere. The clever person redirects that strength. They focus only on what their effort can actually shape, and they release everything else with the quiet understanding that not every door is meant to open, not every plan is meant to succeed, and not every relationship is meant to last. This acceptance is not surrender. It is the foundation of genuine power. Number 13, clever people understand the importance of distance. Most people destroy themselves by being too available, too involved, and too present in the lives of others. They believe closeness is always good, that constant communication strengthens bonds, that being involved in everyone's affairs makes them important. But the truth is the opposite. Excessive availability reduces your value. Constant presence makes you ordinary. And being too involved in everyone's lives turns you into someone whose absence will not be felt because your presence was never rare enough to matter. The clever person understands this immediately. They create deliberate distance not because they do not care, but because they understand that scarcity strengthens value while constant availability erodes it. This is one of the hardest lessons for emotionally generous people to accept because their instincts push them in the opposite direction. They want to be there for everyone, respond to every message immediately, show up at every event, support every request. And while these impulses come from a good place, they slowly transform you into someone whose presence is taken for granted because it is guaranteed. People stop appreciating you because they no longer need to. They know you will be there regardless of how they treat you, regardless of whether they reciprocate, regardless of whether they invest anything back into the relationship. And this is the moment your value begins quietly disappearing while you keep giving more, hoping the imbalance will somehow correct itself. The clever person interrupts this pattern early. They allow space to exist in their relationships. They do not respond instantly to everything. They do not show up everywhere they are invited. They do not pour themselves into people who have not earned that level of access. This selective distance does not damage real connections. It strengthens them. Because the people who genuinely value you begin to recognize that your presence is a gift rather than an entitlement. And the people who only valued you for what they could extract begin to drift away naturally, which is exactly the filtration the clever person was quietly creating all along. Number 14. Clever people refuse to compete on other people's terms. Most of the suffering in modern life comes from competing in arenas other people designed for purposes other people defined. People compete for attention on platforms that profit from their insecurity. They compete for status in social circles that measure worth through criteria they never chose. They compete for approval from individuals whose validation they would never accept if they thought about it clearly. And in all this competition, they slowly forget what they themselves actually wanted before the world told them what to want. The clever person steps back from these games. They examine each arena before entering it. They ask whether the prize at the end is actually something they value or simply something they were trained to chase. And often, the answer is that the prize was never worth the cost of the competition. This withdrawal from unnecessary competition is not laziness. It is precision. The clever person still competes, but they choose carefully where to direct their energy. They compete only in arenas that align with their long-term vision. They compete only for outcomes that actually matter to them. They compete only when the cost of winning is justified by the value of the prize. Everything else, they simply ignore. They let others exhaust themselves chasing things that look important but are ultimately empty. They let others burn out trying to win competitions that produce nothing meaningful even when won. And while everyone else is racing in circles, the clever person is quietly building something that will outlast all of that noise. Write this in the comments. I choose my battles with intention. Machiavelli understood that some battles are designed to drain you regardless of outcome. The person who fights every battle eventually loses the war because they have no energy left for the battles that actually matter. The clever person preserves their strength. They walk past the small provocations, the petty competitions, the social games designed to pull them into chaos that benefits someone else. They protect their focus the way a wise leader protects their kingdom. And from that preserved focus, they accomplish things that those who fought every battle never had the energy to even begin. Number 15. Clever people develop the rarest skill of all, which is the ability to remain calm when everything around them is collapsing. Most people fall apart the moment a situation becomes uncertain. They panic. They react. They make impulsive decisions designed to relieve their immediate discomfort, and those decisions often create much larger problems later. The clever person trains themselves for the opposite response. When chaos arrives, they become quieter. When pressure intensifies, they slow down instead of speeding up. When others lose control, they tighten their grip on their own thinking. This calmness is not natural to anyone. It is built deliberately through repeated exposure to difficult situations and through the conscious refusal to allow panic to dictate behavior. This quality alone is one of the most valuable assets a person can possess because almost everyone else loses access to their intelligence the moment fear arrives. Their thinking narrows. Their judgment collapses. Their ability to see options disappears. And in that moment, the person who can remain calm has an enormous advantage. They can see what others cannot see. They can think when others cannot think. They can act with precision while others act with desperation. And this difference, over time, produces results that look almost supernatural from the outside, but are actually just the natural consequence of trained composure meeting untrained chaos. Machiavelli understood that the leader who remains calm when others panic becomes the only person others can follow. Calmness in crisis is leadership in its purest form. It does not require titles, authority, or permission. It simply emerges naturally because the person who holds steady when everything else is shaking becomes a kind of anchor that others instinctively gather around. The clever person understands this and trains for it long before any crisis arrives. They practice composure in small situations so that when large situations come, the response is already built into them. They do not have to summon calmness in the moment of greatest pressure. It is already there, waiting, because they prepared for it long before they needed it. Number 16. Clever people understand the power of being misunderstood. One of the heaviest burdens emotionally sensitive people carry is the constant need to be understood by everyone around them. They explain themselves repeatedly, defend their intentions endlessly, and exhaust their energy trying to correct every misinterpretation of who they are. But the clever person eventually learns a quiet, liberating truth. Being misunderstood is not always a problem to fix. Sometimes it is a form of protection. Because people who fully understand you also fully know how to influence you, manipulate you, and use your patterns against you. And when certain individuals misread you, they expose themselves through their wrong assumptions, while you remain free to operate without their interference. The clever person stops chasing the impossible task of being correctly perceived by everyone. They accept that some people will always misread them. Some will assume arrogance where there is only boundaries. Some will assume coldness where there is only discernment. Some will assume weakness where there is only restraint. And rather than wasting their life correcting these misreadings, the clever person simply lets them exist. Because every minute spent defending yourself to people who have already decided who you are is a minute stolen from building who you are actually becoming. And over time, this acceptance produces a strange kind of freedom. You stop performing for audiences whose opinions never deserved that much of your attention in the first place. Machiavelli understood that being underestimated is often more valuable than being respected. The person who is correctly understood becomes a target. The person who is misread becomes invisible in plain sight. And invisibility, when used strategically, allows you to move through environments that would otherwise resist you. The clever person uses this principle deliberately. They do not always correct false impressions. They do not always reveal their true capabilities. They allow others to form whatever picture serves their own observation, knowing that the picture will eventually be replaced by reality at a moment of their choosing, not when others demand it. Number 17. Clever people understand that relationships are built on alignment, not effort. Most people believe that relationships fail because of insufficient effort, that if they just tried harder, communicated better, sacrificed more, the relationship would survive. And while effort matters, it is not the foundation. The foundation is alignment. Two people whose values, directions, and inner architectures genuinely match can survive almost anything. Two people whose foundations do not match will eventually collapse, no matter how much effort is poured into the structure. The clever person learns this distinction early and stops trying to force compatibility where compatibility was never possible. This realization changes how the clever person approaches every relationship in their life. They stop trying to convince people to value them. They stop trying to negotiate with individuals whose internal map of the world is fundamentally different from their own. They stop trying to manufacture connection where chemistry exists but alignment does not. Because they understand that real connection cannot be forced into existence through effort. It can only be recognized, nurtured, and protected where it already naturally exists. And recognizing this saves them from the most exhausting form of suffering, which is trying to maintain something that was never structurally possible in the first place. This is also why clever people are slow to form deep bonds. They are not antisocial. They are simply selective. They understand that depth requires alignment, and alignment cannot be verified quickly. They observe how a person behaves under stress, how they treat people who can do nothing for them, how they respond to disagreement, how they handle their own emotions. These details accumulate slowly, revealing whether real alignment exists or whether the apparent connection was only chemistry waiting to fade. And from this patient observation, the clever person builds the small circle of relationships that will actually sustain them across decades, while everyone else cycles through endless connections that look promising at first but collapse the moment real testing arrives. Number 18. The final and most important lesson of becoming clever is this. Cleverness without character becomes manipulation. And manipulation, no matter how sophisticated, eventually destroys the person who practices it. Because the world has a way of returning to people what they send out. The manipulator may win short battles, may extract temporary advantages, may control specific situations through cleverness alone. But across time, the architecture of their life begins to crumble in ways they did not expect. Relationships become hollow. Trust disappears. Loneliness arrives quietly and refuses to leave. And the very intelligence that gave them power in the short term becomes the thing that isolates them in the long term. Because no one wants to remain close to someone who calculates every interaction. The clever person whose cleverness is anchored in character operates differently. They use their perception not to exploit others, but to protect themselves and the people they genuinely love. They use their understanding of human nature not to manipulate, but to navigate. They use their patience, their silence, their timing not as weapons, but as tools for building a life that does not require deception to sustain itself. And this is the difference that determines whether cleverness becomes a blessing or a curse. The same skill, applied in two different directions, produces two completely different lives. This is what Machiavelli was actually pointing toward beneath the surface readings of his work. He was not teaching people to become cold strategists who saw every human being as a piece on a chessboard. He was teaching people to stop being naive in a world that frequently rewards cruelty and punishes innocence. He was teaching survival, not destruction. And the clever person who understands this distinction uses their perception to build something durable, something honest, something that does not require constant manipulation to stay standing. Write this in the comments. I will be clever without becoming cruel. Perhaps the most important realization of all is this. The art of becoming clever is ultimately the art of becoming free. Free from manipulation, free from impulsive reactions, free from unnecessary battles, free from the desperate need for approval that controls so many people their entire lives, free from the illusions that cause repeated suffering, free from the relationships that should have ended years ago, free from the inner chaos that makes wise decisions impossible, and free, finally, from the version of yourself that kept getting hurt by situations you now have the awareness to see coming from a great distance. Many people watching this are tired. Tired of being deceived. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of being the one who always gives more, understands more, forgives more, while receiving less in return. And that exhaustion is not weakness. It is the natural response of a sensitive person who has spent too long operating in environments that did not value sensitivity. But within that exhaustion is also the beginning of transformation. Because the moment you stop expecting the world to reward your softness is the moment you begin developing the cleverness that will finally allow you to protect that softness without being destroyed by it. The person you are becoming, more observant, more strategic, more selective, more composed, is not someone who is losing their warmth. They are someone who is learning how to keep their warmth alive in a world that would otherwise extinguish it. The coldness others may perceive in you is not coldness at all. It is discipline. It is the carefully built structure that protects the part of you that still believes in real connection, real loyalty, real love. And without that structure, your warmth would have been consumed by the world long ago. Cleverness, in its highest form, is not the absence of feeling. It is the protection of feeling. It is the discipline that allows depth to survive in an environment that frequently punishes depth. It is the quiet strength that lets you remain kind without being weak, generous without being exploited, open without being naive, and powerful without becoming cruel. This is the art Machiavelli was really teaching. Not how to dominate others, but how to remain whole in a world that frequently breaks people who refuse to learn its rules. Life will continue to test you. People will continue to disappoint you. Situations will continue to demand more from you than you expected to give. But once you have learned the art of becoming clever, these things stop breaking you. They become information. They become signals. They become the small daily lessons that sharpen you instead of wounding you. And from that sharpening, slowly, almost invisibly, you begin building the life that all your earlier suffering was actually preparing you for. A life that does not depend on luck. A life that does not collapse under pressure. A life that belongs, finally, to you. Drop this final affirmation in the comments. I am becoming the version of myself nothing can break.